Okay, good morning, everyone. Let's see who's here. Karen's here again. Hello, Karen. Jenna's here. Hello, Jenna. Aliana's here. Good morning. Good evening to you, Ella. Hello, Lily. Hello, KC again. Who else is here? Min is here. Mashid is here. Hello again, Mashid. Pearly's here. Hi, Pearly. Hi, Luan. Cindy's here. Hi, Cindy. I'm here. Hello, me. Um, Ying is here. Hello. Good morning, Ying. And good morning, Lim. Good morning to you as well. Um, okay, so what we'll do today, we'll pick up um, we'll pick up where we left off. Good morning, Adalbert. We'll pick up where we left off with our documentary on the sort of beginning of the Qin Dynasty in China. We'll pick that up. We will finish watching it. We'll talk about it a little bit, have a bit of a break, and then we'll come back. And I think we'll talk about Han China. And I think that will, dealing with the Han Dynasty will probably be where we will sort of cut it off for China. Obviously, there's lots of history that happens after that. But like India, China has a very long and complex history, and we can't deal with all of it. And so I think that's where we'll end it. Good morning, Michael. Yeah, okay. So let's dive in. Right. So I had asked you yesterday at the beginning of yesterday's class to read this and answer these questions, and I think what you told me was that the first emperor of Qin brings the Warring States period to an end, right? And so we said that this extended all the way back to the Zhou dynasty, right, where the Zhou had sort of decentralized their power. The one Zhou king had sort of given power to all of his noble family members and friends to sort of rule. But eventually, those family relationships became distant, right, as generations continued. Eventually, they didn't feel any loyalty to one another, and so they started fighting, trying to take over each other's land. And that led to this period of sort of constant warfare, right? The warring states period. And so that's going to be put to an end as the Qin king conquers all the other states and brings them all under his control. Good morning, Jimmy, and good morning, Caleb. Yeah, so the first Qin emperor brings all of those states that were warring, he brings them under his control. We talked a little bit about some reforms and some ideas that come about during the Warring States period, right? During the Warring States period that find their way into the Qin Empire, the way that it works. Hello, Tika. The way that it works. And so the textbook identified this one very intelligent chancellor called Shen Yang. And Shen Yang advises the king at the time, the Duke of Zhao, I believe, advises him to make a number of reforms. Good morning, Sam. And so his ideas are described by a term called legalism, right? So Shen Yang was saying that this is the best way to organize the state to ensure that the ruler has maximum control and maximum power at all times. Okay, so it's kind of a system that a monarch, that a king, or that an emperor can use to sort of efficiently rule over a large territory, right? So we said that Shen Yang advises a couple things. He organizes villages into groups of 5 families, and all of those families are kind of responsible to one another. And so if they produce a lot of crops, or if they do well in battle, then all those families will be rewarded as a team, right? But of course, if they do something bad, if they commit a crime, they'll all be punished similarly as well, right? So these teams kind of keep each other in line, right? Because if one family is not pulling their share, everyone will suffer. And so it helps, these teams help keep each other in line and doing the right thing, right? And so Shenyang says that this ensures a disciplined farming population, but that it would also ensure a disciplined army, because that's where the army comes from. The video, of course, mentioned that the Qin will actually create a standing army, so they'll create professional soldiers. But for most parts in history, and certainly before the Qin Dynasty, most states don't have a formal army. When they need an army, basically the farmers put down their farming tools and pick up swords, and they become the army. So we said, you told me yesterday that the Qin state develops a legal code with a very clear list of penalties for committing crimes, and that those punishments applied to people regardless of their social status, right? So people are equal before the law, which is not always the case, right? When we talked about the legal code of Hammurabi, right, back from Babylon and Mesopotamia, we said that the punishments for crimes differed depending on whether you were a king or a priest, or whether you were a commoner, or whether you were a slave, right? And the further down on the social ladder that you were, the more severe the punishments were, right? So there was different punishments depending on who you were in society. But here in the Qin Dynasty, we have everyone being equal before the law, everyone being punished similarly. Although we didn't quite see that in the film yesterday, right? We saw some different punishments depending on who was who, right? So the Qin subjects, the textbook said, lived under a regime with a transparent set of expectations and a system of reward and punishment, right? So again, we started watching this documentary yesterday, or this historical drama, I guess is maybe more an accurate statement, telling the story of Qin Shihuang. Hopefully I didn't mispronounce that. The Qin king who ends the Warring States period and brings all of these areas under his own control about 2,200 years ago. Okay, and so we said it was kind of a big film. It was shot in IMAX. We're going to see some footage, I believe, of Qin's terracotta army, which of course is a very famous archaeological discovery in China, and so I think we'll see that toward the end. And where we came into this documentary, this is kind of what was happening, right? So it was around 246, and China was at war, right? It was the end of the Warring States period, and Ying Zheng, who is a Qin ruler, is fighting as part of the Warring States period, and so. Sorry, I'm just reading this here, trying to remember what happens. Right, and so we saw at the beginning that there was an attempted coup. Excuse me, sorry. There was an attempted coup, right? So that prime minister tried to overthrow the Qin king, right? But he was caught, and so his accomplice, his associate, was tied to 5 horses, and something horrible happened to his accomplice, as we saw, and he was forced to drink poison, right, as punishment. And so that led to the ultimate unification of China under a Qin king. And so I asked you to do this. I asked you to watch this film and look for evidence of people's subsistence practices, so how they were getting their food. I asked you to look at this film and pay attention to evidence of governance or authority or law. I asked you to look at people's homes and see what people's homes were like. I asked you to look for what kind of technology people were using. And again, technology can be anything that people create and use for a purpose. Evidence of spiritual or religious beliefs. What did you see any of that? And other types of cultural expression, so art, music, dance, things like that. So I'd like to talk about those things, but I think maybe what we should do is watch the rest of the documentary. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do is go back into Microsoft Teams. And so in Teams, you'll see that yesterday I posted the YouTube link for the video, and then those things that I wanted you to look out for. Okay, and so yesterday we watched the first 20 minutes, and so today I'd like you to watch the second 20 minutes. Okay, so I'd like you to watch those 20 minutes and take notes on what you see in terms of subsistence and governance and cultural expressions and all those things that I listed. Okay, so we'll need about 20 minutes for that. You'll need about an extra 5 minutes to type out your things, I think, and we'll probably take a 10-minute break after that. So that will take us to let's see, 25, 35 minutes. That'll take us to 10:50. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do is go to Microsoft Teams, click on that link, watch the last 20 minutes of the video, keep track of what you see in terms of all of those different categories, and then, what did I say, 10:50? 10:55. At 10:55, we'll come back here and we will debrief. Okay, we'll share what we've learned from this film. Okay, so I'll see you in just a little bit. Hello, Carmen. We'll see you in just a little bit. Go watch the rest of the documentary, take notes on what you see, and then when we come back, we'll share and see what we can learn. Okay, so have fun, enjoy the rest of it, and I'll see you at 10:55. Okay. Okay, people, and we're back. That might have been a little longer than we needed. I neglected to see that there was 3 or 4 minutes of credits at the end of that film, but I guess that's okay. Um, so, as you saw there, the documentary was a little bit about the first Qin emperor, how the Warring States period comes to an end, um, a little bit about how that dynasty goes, and how the emperor is buried, and then we see that fantastic archaeological site with all those terracotta soldiers, right? And one of the things that's really remarkable about that site, one is that it's so big and there are so many individual pieces in it, sort of figures and horses. But I don't know if you saw, but if you looked at the faces of all those soldiers, they're all different, right? They're all seemingly modeled on individual people, which is remarkable, right? Which is absolutely amazing. But anyway, that said, what did you see in this film connected to subsistence? Okay, so connected to ways in which people got their food. What did you see? What did you see? What did you see for subsistence practices? How people got their food? We saw a couple of things that I think are connected to this. Yeah, so that's one thing we saw, right? We did see people farming, right? We saw people with a plow behind some oxen or some cattle, right? And they were plowing their fields. We saw that. I forget if we saw it today. We definitely saw it yesterday, right? We saw evidence of people farming, right? We also saw some trade and some pottery, right? So we saw that today where I think it was connected with standardizing weights and measures. And so you saw those government guys walking through the market, making sure that everybody was using standard weights and measures, right? And so clearly people were growing their own food, right? They were engaging in agriculture, but they were also probably selling and trading some food in the market, right? Yeah, and some of those pots, Karen, some of those pots might have been just empty pots, but some of them might be filled with food or oil or grain or stuff like that, right? So that's evidence of that. Yeah, Jimmy, we definitely saw farming. We definitely saw trade. We saw trade. Yeah, so people were getting their food in a number of ways, right? And so some people were farming at this time in history, but of course, as we know with civilizations, only some people are farmers and other people are free to do other things, right? And so we have some people who are teachers. We saw some people, we saw a teacher teaching some students how to read and how to write. Some people make crafts like pots. Some people raise horses. They do all kinds of make clothing. All sorts of people do different jobs in society, right? And so we see that some people are farming and some people are selling the things that they produce, like pottery, or they're selling their labor and their knowledge in order to get food, right? So that was pretty good. I think that was all we saw. There was a lot. There was a lot to see here in terms of governance and authority and law. There was lots to say about this. What are some of the things that we saw or heard about? What are some of the things that we What are some of the things that they see? What are some of the things that we see with regard to governance, with regard to law, with regard to authority or power? That's a good one. Casey says that the emperor's law should be the only law, right? So we said that we saw the Qin emperor, or we read about the Qin emperor creating a law code, right? And making sure that there was this transparent law code with punishments that everyone could live by. But we also saw him in this film try to push aside all other types of thought, right? And so, yeah, Casey says we saw him burning books that promoted freedom of thought, and he buried the intellectuals alive, right? Which is a little scary for teachers like me. But yeah, he put a huge number of, very sort of intellectual, learned people. He threw them all in a pit and buried them alive, and then burned all the books, right? So that's pretty extreme, right? But he clearly felt that his word and his law were the only ones that should exist, right? So we definitely saw that. Right, so we saw the following of the king's orders, right? And we saw even when dead, okay. And yeah, the execution there that we saw at the beginning was not, I'm not sure that, I'm not sure if you're thinking of something else or not. The execution we saw at the beginning of yesterday was to do with an attempted coup, so they were going to overthrow the king, the prime minister, and someone else. And so that's the person who gets tied to the horses and pulled apart. Unless you're thinking of something else, Karen, maybe let me know. I don't recall a riot in there, but maybe I'm forgetting something. Definitely that's true, right? So in this empire, we're seeing the king, we're seeing Qin as the sole authority, right? All authority comes from him, and his authority has been given to him by heaven, right? So he kind of has the mandate of heaven. He's been given power by heaven, and so he has all the power in society, right? And so what he says is what goes. What else? What else did we see in terms of governance and authority and law? Do you remember that after Qin died and his 18th, the intellectuals were rioting? Oh, okay. I missed that, Karen, but good catch. Yeah, let's talk about that first. So Karen says the intellectuals rioted and were executed. Okay, I remember that now. The king's son committed suicide because he thought the king ordered him to do so, even though he was dead. Oh, that's right. So yeah, in the king's will, the forged king's will, that his 18th son had written up, they asked the firstborn to kill himself, and he did, right? So he listened to the emperor even when he was dead. There was also that seal. Remember when we saw the 18th son, after he burned the original will of the emperor, he was looking at that seal, right? And that seal is important too, because that's power, right? You can have something written up, right? You can have a decree written, and then you put the stamp of the emperor on it, right? And that holds the force of the emperor's words, right? Whatever is on that piece of paper the emperor has said it, right? And so you can see that 18th son was kind of, smiling and rubbing his hands together almost, because he had this seal, right? And with it, he could command people, right? Yeah, that was a good catch. Thank you for that, Karen. The suicide thing and the rioting of the intellectuals. That's good. Yeah, harsh punishments for particular crimes, right? So we saw a few harsh punishments. We saw prime minister poisoned. We saw someone pulled apart, which probably hurts quite a bit. We saw intellectuals buried alive, which seems like a pretty harsh punishment as well. So yeah, some pretty harsh punishments exist in this time and place, right? What about people's homes? What do people's homes look like? What do people's homes look like in this period? We saw kind of we kind of saw two types of homes, I think. But what did we see? Two types of homes, I think. Yeah, so Karen says here, yeah, farmers had kind of very simple mud huts, right? So we saw that, I think at the very beginning of the film, that was yesterday. And I think what we were seeing was someone coming to the family farm to tell them that their son, that their son had died in battle. I think that's what we were. There was no subtitles. They were speaking. I think they were speaking Mandarin there, so I didn't know what they were saying. But I think they were telling the family that their son had died in battle, and so they were very sad. But you could see that the farmers just lived in a very simple kind of hut, right? It's a very, very simple, basic house. But then, of course, the emperor, we see a massive stone palace, right? With all those stairs leading up the front. And so we see a pretty big inequality in sort of a financial inequality and a power inequality, right? There's all these little people farming, living in mud huts, and then there's the emperor living in this giant, rich stone palace, right, with carpets and tables and all kinds of things, right? Yeah, and so the palaces were very rich, right? Lots of furniture, lots of gold and bronze, probably lots of fancy food, lots of carpets and tapestries and things hanging from the walls. So a really big difference in terms of the way that the emperor lives and the way that kind of regular people seem to live. What else? I think we might have something else here. No? Okay. Yeah, I think that's all we kind of saw for that one. Okay, this is a big one. We saw tons and tons of technology, right? We saw tons of different things that people created in order to use for a purpose, right? There's all kinds of technology here. What kind of technology do we see? What kind of technology are people using in this period of history in this place? Okay. So KC says here the weapon used by archers. Yeah. So we see those. They're called crossbows, right? So they almost have like a gun kind of handle to them, and then they have a bow mounted on the front, and they shoot an arrow or a dart, right? So we see crossbows, which are a pretty interesting form of technology, right? And they exist very early in China. I think they're invented in medieval Europe as well, but I think they're invented much later. So crossbows appear here in China very, very early. Karen says we see bronze, right? So the Chinese developed bronze hundreds of years earlier, but of course it's still readily apparent in the Qin Dynasty, right? So they're probably using it for dishes. They're probably using it for armor. They are using it for sculptures. We see sculptures made of a number of different things, right? So there are bronze sculptures from this period, but there are also clay or terracotta sculptures and wood ones as well, although we don't see them. I don't think we really see them in this documentary, but they do exist. There's also medicines, and so there's an elixir made of mercury, and so that's pretty interesting, right? We see a Taoist, looks like a Taoist priest or a Taoist religious leader giving the emperor an elixir that will help him to defeat death and to prolong his life, right? But unfortunately, he's giving him mercury, right? Which, if you probably know, mercury is pretty toxic, right? You don't want to ingest any of it. You don't want to take any mercury into your own body. But the Qin emperor is drinking or eating mercury in order to prolong his life. And of course, ironically, it's going to end his life because, again, we know mercury to be very toxic, right? We see books, yeah. So we see people writing on scrolls and writing things down on paper, right? So paper might be another one too. Books, and that big stamp, right, is a piece of technology as well, right? And it's a very kind of ornate piece. It looked like it was jade, but I'm not sure about that. So Jimmy says, yeah, so paper making, yeah. So they made paper for scrolls and for writing, and so we saw lots of people writing. We saw the will of the emperor was written on paper, as was the fake will of the emperor. They're definitely using iron at this point. So I think they're smelting iron at this point. Are they? Let me just check something here. Would those have been iron? Yeah, I guess from what we read the other day, archaeological evidence revealed that iron smelting was developed as early as the 5th century in the Zhou dynasty. And so it seems that yeah, indeed, that the Chinese would have been smelting iron and creating iron tools at that period of history. So that's good. What else? There's even more than that. So there's the crossbow we see. There's bronze sculptures. There's medicine. There's books. There's the stamp. There's paper. There's probably iron implements, although it's hard to tell what's iron and what's bronze in that film, but there's probably both showing up. What else is there? Let's see. Well, you could think about all of the clothing that they were wearing as technology, right? Because that's something that people create for a purpose, right? They wear it to cover themselves. The armor, those armor plates that all of the soldiers were wearing, that's a technology, and their helmets as well. Um, yeah, Pearlie says the construction of the Great Wall. So um, that's technological knowledge, right? They need knowledge of engineering and math and geometry in order to construct that wall, and that's a major undertaking, right? And it's still, of course, the Great Wall is still there. It's a big tourist attraction. People like to go see it, and so yeah, the wall is a piece of technology. Um, what else was there? All of their weapons were technology. We saw furniture that was technology. We saw carpets. Um, the plow, right? The plow that the farmers were using behind that cow or behind the ox. That plow is technology. Um, yeah. Okay. That's good. That's good. That's good. Oh, and Casey said the emperor, where the emperor stays when they travel. Um, yeah. So like kind of a temporary structure. I don't know if you want to call it a tent or what you want to call it. That would be one too. Um, painting. You might put that under art, Chiffon. You might call that art rather than technology. I think. Um, yeah, there's probably some overlap, but we'll take it. We'll take that one. Okay, so there's lots and lots of technology that we see being used in that film. Um, what about this? What kind of spiritual or religious beliefs do we see in this film? And I think there's a handful of them that we can probably name. Things that we kind of have heard about already, or things that we saw expressed. What do we see in terms of spiritual or religious beliefs? I might sneeze. It's all right. Quick sneeze. Okay. So for spiritual or religious beliefs, Karen says the king becomes a god, can live forever, and there's an afterlife. Yeah. So we see that the Qin emperor here is preparing for some kind of afterlife, right? He wants to be buried with all of these things so that he will have them in another life, right? So that's kind of a spiritual belief. Whoops, where did that go? And he also comes to the belief that he can almost become a god, right? And that he can live forever. And so we see them trying to create some sort of thing that he can take to make himself immortal, right? And so that's kind of a spiritual belief as well. So those are good. Yeah, he becomes obsessed with immortality, right? He doesn't want to die. He wants to sort of overcome mortality, or overcome the human condition, or become more than human. So again, that's kind of a spiritual, supernatural kind of idea. So that works. I guess in some ways the king is obeyed as if he is a god, because he does have absolute power. I don't think, to my understanding, that the Qin emperor wouldn't have been seen as a god. So it wasn't like in ancient Egypt where Pharaoh was actually a god, right? He was seen as a god on earth. I don't know that Qin was quite seen that way, but of course he had absolute power in his kingdom, in his empire, right? Um, what else? There's more. But wait, there's more. There's one, two, maybe three things. There might be three things. Definitely two. The third one I'm not sure about. The third one I think I saw, but I'm not sure if I saw it or not. Spiritual or religious beliefs, or evidence of them. Okay, so a couple things that you might have seen. Um, when they were talking about the elixir, when they were feeding mercury to the emperor, you saw that the the priest or whoever he had that Taoist symbol, right? He had the yin and yang on his robes, right? So that's kind of evidence of that Taoist spiritual practice, which we had read about, right? So that's there. There is talk about heaven, right? So there's the idea that the heavens have given power to the emperor, right? He has the mandate of heaven. So there's some sort of connection of his power is being legitimized, right? It's being backed up by the heavens, right? By the power up there. And the third thing is that I think we saw some symbols of dragons, right? And so remember, we heard about the dragon as a symbol of kind of the sky, right? The cosmic force. And I know that dragons in sort of the Chinese worldview mean a lot of different things, but based on what we have seen so far, the dragon is one of these two forces that are locked in struggle, right? So I think we saw the dragon too, but I'm not 100% sure about that one. Okay, and last one. What kind of cultural expressions did we see? What kind of cultural expressions did we see? So, yeah, let's see what comes up for this. Expressions of culture. Okay, so okay. So Karen says music, right? So we definitely heard some music, right? That was yesterday at the Emperor's Palace during a big party. We saw people playing music, right? They were playing some stringed instruments. They were playing those big bells that we saw from the Confucius video, right? We saw that happening. Um, we saw dances, right? So those girls in the Emperor's Palace were doing that sort of very elaborate dance yesterday in the film. What else did we see? What else did we see? Clothing, I guess, can be seen as a cultural expression, right? Because it's clothing has a practical purpose, right? It covers the body and it keeps you warm and things like that. But it's also styled in a way that expresses cultural values or cultural ideas of beauty, right? Particularly the fancy clothes. Maybe not the clothes that the farmers were wearing every day, but certainly the emperor and the empress and people who were either higher up in society or on special occasions, they were dressing in ways that expressed maybe cultural values or ideas of beauty or stylishness, right? So yeah, Karen, I would put clothes in that category, and school as well. Yeah, we saw that. Reading and writing was being kind of taught through school. So I'll go with that. Yeah. We saw a coronation ceremony, right? And we also saw a marriage ceremony. And both of those things are cultural events, right? An expression of the coronation ceremony is kind of an expression of leadership and power in society, and marriage is an expression of relationship, right? Of connecting people and connecting families. That's good. We saw their writing system. That's good. So we saw lots of writing in this film, right, Pearlie? We saw lots of writing of wills, of decrees of the emperor. And then, of course, we saw the classroom where those children were being taught to read and write in school, right? So that's good too. What else? So we saw music, we saw dance, we saw clothing or fashion, we saw school and the process of writing. We saw a few ceremonial or ritualistic activities, right? We saw marriage and we saw coronation. What else did we see in terms of cultural expression? What else did we see? Okay, music, dance. We could probably add sculpture to that as well. So those all of those terracotta soldiers and the horses, that's another expression of culture, right? That's a piece of art. And so we see lots of sculptures. Architecture might be seen as an expression of culture as well, the way in which buildings are styled. I think I'm going to go back to Chiffon's answer of painting. Paintings would definitely be artwork on the wall, would definitely be a cultural expression. I don't remember if we saw any or not, but there is such artwork from ancient China, and so we can say painting for sure is a cultural expression. Anything else? Anything else we missed? Got art, dance, music, fashion, sculpture, painting, a number of different ceremonial events. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So what I'd like you to do then is, we see in the film that the Qin Dynasty kind of appears and then kind of disappears very quickly, right? And so this warring states period is going on. Everyone's fighting with everyone. And finally, the Qin emperor brings all of those states under his control. He creates a sort of a political system in which he has all the authority. He tries to get rid of all of the intellectual thought. He burns a bunch of books and buries a bunch of intellectuals. He creates a giant tomb for himself, right, with all of these terracotta soldiers. He dies because he is, eating mercury, and you can't do that. And after he dies, his successor comes to the throne, but very shortly, the Qin Dynasty will lose power, and it will be taken over by the Han. Okay, and the Han will be a much longer lived dynasty, so it will last for a longer period, and again, it will be more important in terms of it will be more important politically and culturally for China as well. And so again, we're going to learn about the Han Dynasty here, and then that's where we'll kind of cut it off for China. And so what I would like you to do, and I think this is really all the time that we'll have left for today, is that I'm going to ask you to read a short section of the textbook. And so I'm putting this, I put that into Student Portal just now. And so again, I've got just a few pages for you to read on the Han Dynasty. And so we'll talk about how the Qin Dynasty kind of fell and how the Han rulers came into power. It'll talk a little bit about what Han society was actually like, and what kind of things people were doing at this period of history. We'll talk about Han governance, okay, and so how the government system differed from the one that the Qin Emperor had created. Our friend Confucius will enter back into the picture, and not Confucius himself, because he's dead by this point, but his ideas will be reintegrated into the state, just like he always wanted, right? It's going to happen for him. It's just that it took a few hundred years until the time was right for his kind of ideas. And then we'll very quickly look at the Silk Road, which I think came up maybe a week ago or so. Sarvish, I think you might have mentioned it in passing. But that's what we'll do, and that's about all the time that we'll have left. And so if you go to if you go to Microsoft Teams, you'll see that I've put that information there, what I'd like you to read and the questions I'd like you to answer. So I'll give you the rest of the time today to read that section and to type out your answers so that you can put them in the live chat. And that's what we'll deal with first thing tomorrow morning. We'll do that, and we'll kind of tie up the Han Dynasty, and we'll probably tie up China as well, in terms of trying to summarize it so that we can move on to Greece, which I believe is next, which is a bit of a gear change, right? So that's what I'll give you the rest of the class to do. Read that section, answer the questions, type them out, and then we'll pick those up probably first thing tomorrow, okay? So that's all I have for you today. Hope everyone has a nice rest of the day, and read that section, answer the questions from Microsoft Teams, and I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, so bye.